Morning arrived gently, as if the world itself had chosen not to disturb the quiet harmony of the house. Soft golden sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting delicate patterns across the polished floor. Outside, the distant hum of the city had already begun. Cars passing, vendors calling out, life moving forward in its usual rhythm. But inside this home, everything felt still, peaceful, perfect. At the dining table, Amina moved gracefully, placing a cup of tea in front of Zaid. The faint clink of porcelain against glass echoed softly in the calm space. She adjusted the tablecloth absent-mindedly, her movements precise, practiced, almost like a routine she had memorized over the years. "Your tea," she said quietly, her voice warm but restrained. Zaid barely looked up. His eyes were fixed on his phone, his expression unreadable. He murmured in response, taking the cup without meeting her gaze. For a moment, silence settled between them again. From the outside, they looked like a perfect couple, living in a beautiful home, sharing quiet mornings, bound by years of companionship. Anyone passing by would have envied this life. The calm, the stability, the unspoken understanding. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Amina stood near the window, her fingers lightly brushing the curtain as she looked outside. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, composed, calm. But her eyes carried a depth that told a different story. "Will you be late tonight?" she asked gently, still facing away. Zaid paused for a fraction of a second. Just enough to be noticed if someone was paying attention. "Yes." "Work," he replied shortly. A simple answer. Too simple. Amina nodded slowly, as if she had expected nothing more. "Of course," she said. The words were soft, but something about them lingered in the air. Zaid stood up, grabbing his keys in a hurry. "I'll see you later." "Take care," she replied, offering a small, almost perfect smile. He left without looking back. The door clicked shut, and with it, the silence in the house deepened. For a few seconds, Amina remained exactly where she was. Still. Motionless. The faint smile on her lips slowly faded, replaced by something far more complex, something unreadable. Her eyes drifted toward the empty doorway. And in that quiet moment it became clear. This perfect life, this peaceful home, was nothing more than an illusion. And somewhere beneath that calm surface, a storm had already begun to rise. Because some silences are not peace. They are warnings. The days that followed did not change suddenly. They shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, like cracks forming beneath a surface that once seemed unbreakable. Morning routines remained the same. The tea was still served on time. The house was still spotless. Meals were still prepared with care. From the outside, nothing was wrong. But inside, something was slowly fading. Zaid had grown distant in ways that were difficult to explain, yet impossible to ignore. His laughter, once easy and warm, had become rare. Conversations turned shorter, colder. One evening, as the city lights flickered to life outside their window, Amina sat on the edge of the bed, her phone resting in her hand. She stared at the screen, hesitating for a moment before pressing call. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. She swallowed quietly, her fingers tightening slightly around the phone. A few seconds later, a message appeared.
I'm Buse.
Talk later. That was all.
No explanation. No softness.
Just distance. Amina exhaled slowly, placing the phone beside her. Her gaze drifted toward the half-open window, where the distant sounds of traffic blended into the night. Somewhere, people were laughing. Somewhere, life was still full. But inside this room, it felt different. And if you've ever felt this kind of silence in a relationship, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Later that night, the door finally opened. Zaid stepped in, his expression tired but detached. He avoided eye contact as he placed his keys on the table. "You're late," Amina said gently, not accusing, just stating a fact. "Work," he replied, the same word, the same tone.
Flat.
Rehearsed. She nodded slowly. "You didn't answer my call." I told you I was busy. His voice carried a slight edge now, enough to silence any further questions. Amina looked at him for a moment, really looked at him.
The
Man standing in front of her was familiar. The same face, the same presence. And yet, not the same person. I made dinner, she said softly. I'm not hungry. Another simple response. Another quiet dismissal. The space between them felt heavier now, not filled with silence, but with everything that was no longer being said. Zaid moved past her, heading toward the other side of the room, already lost in his own world. His phone lit up again in his hand, his attention instantly drawn away. Amina remained where she was.
still.
Observing. Understanding. Because sometimes, distance does not arrive with loud arguments or broken words. Sometimes it comes quietly, in missed calls, in cold replies, in the absence of care. And as Amina stood there, surrounded by the life she had built, she began to realize something unsettling. This wasn't just distance. This was the beginning of something far deeper. Something that would soon reveal a truth she could no longer ignore. The truth did not arrive with a dramatic confession or a sudden revelation. It came quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, in the middle of an ordinary day. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor as Amina folded freshly dried clothes, her movements slow and absent-minded. The television murmured softly in the background, more for company than attention. Everything felt routine, predictable. Until it wasn't. Zaid's phone, left carelessly on the table, lit up. Amina didn't mean to look. But something, perhaps instinct, perhaps something deeper, pulled her eyes toward the screen. A message. Just a few words. I miss you. When will I see you again? Her hands froze mid-motion. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too still. For a moment, she simply stared, as if her mind refused to process what her eyes had already understood. Then, slowly, she reached for the phone. Her fingers trembled, not out of fear, but from the weight of what she already suspected. The screen unlocked too easily. And there it was. Messages. Call logs. Moments shared that did not belong to her marriage. Soft words he no longer spoke at home, sent freely to someone else. Promises. Laughter. Late-night conversations. A life hidden in plain sight. Amina sat down slowly, the phone still in her hand. Her heartbeat echoed loudly in her ears, but her face remained calm, almost unnaturally so. So this is where you've been, she whispered, her voice barely audible. No tears came.
Not yet.
Because sometimes the deepest pain does not break you instantly. It settles. It sinks quietly into your chest and waits. The front door clicked open in the distance. Zaid was home. Amina's eyes lifted toward the sound. For a brief moment, something flickered in them, hurt, disbelief, perhaps even anger. But just as quickly it disappeared. By the time he stepped into the room, she was already standing.
Composed. Silent.
As if nothing had happened. You're home early, she said gently, placing the phone back exactly where it had been. Yeah, meeting got cancelled, he replied casually, unaware, completely unaware. Amina nodded. I'll make tea. And just like that, the moment passed. Or, at least, that's what it looked like. Because the truth is, Amina had already seen everything. And she made a choice. Not to fight. Not to question. Not to reveal what she knew. But to stay silent. To watch. To understand. And to prepare. Because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is the beginning of something far more powerful. And as the evening settled over the city, wrapping the house in shadows and quiet tension, Amina stood in the kitchen, her reflection faintly visible in the dark window. Calm on the outside, unshaken. But inside, something had changed forever. And soon, that silence would speak louder than anything he could ever imagine. The evening settled over the city, like a quiet warning. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the narrow road outside the house. Inside, everything was in its place, clean, organized, untouched by the chaos that was about to arrive. Amina stood in the living room, adjusting a vase on the table. Fresh flowers, carefully arranged. The faint scent of jasmine lingered in the air. From the outside, the house still carried the same calm, the same dignity. But tonight, something felt different. Then, the sound of a car stopping outside. Amina's hands paused mid-motion. Moments later, footsteps approached the door. Not one set.
Two.
Her eyes slowly lifted toward the entrance. The door opened. Zaid walked in first, his expression unreadable. But there was something unusual about the way he carried himself. A quiet confidence, almost arrogance. And then, she stepped in. A woman Amina had never seen before, yet instantly recognized. The Mistress. She entered without hesitation, her heels clicking against the floor, her presence bold, unapologetic. Her eyes scanned the room with subtle curiosity, as if measuring a space she already believed she belonged in. For a brief second, silence swallowed everything. Amina stood still.
No gasp.
No visible reaction. Just stillness. Zaid closed the door behind them, the sound echoing louder than it should have. Amina, he said, his tone firm, controlled. We need to talk. Her gaze shifted from him to the woman standing beside him.
Calm.
Observant. I can see that, she replied softly. The Mistress crossed her arms slightly, a faint smirk touching her lips. There was no shame in her posture.
No hesitation.
Only confidence. As if this moment had already been decided. Zaid stepped forward, creating a distance between Amina and everything that once felt familiar. This is Sarah, he said, his voice flat. And things are going to change. The words hung heavily in the air. But Amina didn't ask questions. Didn't react the way he expected. Instead, she simply looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in a long while. And in her eyes, there was no shock. Only understanding. Because this moment wasn't new to her. It was just the first time it had stepped into the light. I understand, she said quietly. Zaid frowned slightly, caught off guard by her calmness. The Mistress shifted uncomfortably for the first time, her confidence flickering just a little. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Amina turned her back to them, walking slowly toward the center of the room, her step steady, controlled. Because the storm they thought they had just brought into her life had already been waiting. And now it was her turn. What they didn't realize yet was that this unexpected arrival was not the beginning of her downfall. It was the beginning of theirs. The air inside the room had changed. What once felt like a home now carried a sharp, uncomfortable tension, thick, almost suffocating. Even the soft ticking of the wall clock seemed louder, echoing against the silence that had settled between them. Amina stood near the center of the room, her back straight, her expression calm. Across from her, Zaid slipped his hand into his coat pocket, his movements slow, deliberate. The Mistress stood slightly behind him, watching closely, her eyes moving between them with quiet anticipation. Then, a crisp sound broke the silence. Zaid pulled out a folded set of papers and tossed them onto the table in front of Amina. The papers slid across the polished surface, stopping just inches away from her. Sign them, he said coldly.
No hesitation. No emotion.
Just a command. Amina's gaze lowered to the papers. She didn't touch them. Not yet. She didn't need to. Because she already knew. Divorce papers. The word itself carried weight, but in this moment, it felt strangely light, almost expected. I think it's time we stop pretending, Zaid continued, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. This marriage is over. The Mistress shifted slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips now, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Zaid stepped closer, his presence looming, his tone sharpening. I've moved on. You should too. Silence.
Heavy.
Unbroken. He watched her carefully, waiting, expecting something.
Tears.
Begging. Anger. Anything that would confirm his power in this moment. But Amina didn't react. She simply stood there, her eyes still on the papers, her face unreadable. You heard me, didn't you? He pressed, irritation slipping into his voice. Sign them. Still nothing. The room seemed to tighten around them. Outside, a distant car passed, its fading sound only deepening the stillness inside. Amina slowly lifted her gaze. Not to the papers. Not to the woman beside him. But to Zaid. And for a brief moment something shifted. Because the look in her eyes wasn't broken. It wasn't weak. It wasn't even angry. It was calm. Unshaken. And that was not what he expected. I understand, she said quietly. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made the room feel even smaller. Zaid frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had imagined this moment differently. He had imagined her falling apart. But instead, she stood there like someone who had already accepted everything. Like someone who had already moved past the pain he was trying to inflict. The mistress's smile faded slightly now, uncertainty creeping in. Because something about Amina's silence felt dangerous. And as the papers lay untouched on the table between them, it became clear. This moment of humiliation was not breaking her. It was setting the stage for something far more unexpected. Something Zaid was not prepared for. Something that would begin with a single, quiet reaction. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The papers lay untouched on the table, their edges barely moving under the faint breeze from the open window. Outside, the distant sounds of the city carried on as usual, cars passing, voices echoing faintly in the night. But inside the room, everything had fallen into a heavy, unnatural silence. Zaid stood waiting, watching, expecting. But Amina did not move the way he thought she would. Instead, her fingers slowly brushed against the edge of the table, steady, unshaken. Her gaze lowered once more to the papers, not with fear, but with quiet understanding. And then, something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not a wide smile. Not forced. Not emotional. Just a small, calm, almost peaceful smile. The kind of smile that didn't belong in a moment like this. Zaid's expression changed instantly. His brows tightened, confusion replacing the certainty he had walked in with. "What's so funny?" he asked, his tone sharper now. Amina lifted her eyes to meet his. "Nothing," she said softly. But her smile didn't fade. It lingered subtle, controlled, unsettling. The mistress shifted slightly, her earlier confidence slipping. She crossed her arms, glancing at Zaid as if silently asking the same question. This wasn't right. This wasn't how this moment was supposed to feel. "You think this is a joke?" Zaid's voice hardened, a trace of irritation now impossible to hide. Amina let out a quiet breath, almost like a soft laugh, but not quite. "No," she replied gently. "Not at all." She finally reached for the papers, lifting them with careful hands. The sound of the pages sliding against each other echoed faintly in the still room. For a few seconds, she scanned them. Then, she nodded, as if confirming something only she understood. "You've made your decision," she said calmly. Zaid straightened slightly. "Yes, I have." Another pause. And then, "That's good." The words landed differently than expected. Too easy. Too accepting. Zaid blinked, caught off guard again. "Good," he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. Amina looked at him, her smile soft but steady. "Yes," she said. "It saves me the trouble." Silence. A deeper kind this time. The kind that doesn't just fill a room, but shifts it entirely. The mistress's posture stiffened, her confidence now replaced with uncertainty. Her eyes moved between them, trying to understand what was unfolding. Because something had changed. Completely. Zaid's control over the moment, the dominance he had walked in with, was slipping. And Amina hadn't raised her voice. Hadn't argued. Hadn't even shown anger. Just a smile. But that smile carried something far more powerful than tears ever could. It carried knowledge, preparation, and a quiet kind of strength that neither of them had expected. Amina placed the papers back on the table, her fingers resting lightly on top of them. And in that moment, it became clear. This was not the reaction of a woman who had just been broken. This was the reaction of someone who was about to reveal everything. The smile lingered. Soft, controlled, almost gentle. But behind it, something far deeper was beginning to rise. The room had gone completely still. Even the faint sounds from outside, the distant traffic, a passing voice, the rustling of trees, felt like they belonged to another world. Inside this house, everything now revolved around Amina. She slowly lifted her hand from the papers and looked directly at Zaid. "You really thought I didn't know?" she asked quietly. The question was simple, but it hit differently. Zaid's expression shifted instantly. "What are you talking about?" he replied, though his voice lacked the confidence it had just moments ago. Amina tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady. "About her," she said, her gaze briefly flickering toward the woman standing beside him. "About the late nights. The lies. The messages you thought I would never see." Silence.
Heavy.
Unavoidable. The mistress stiffened, her arms tightening across her chest. Zaid's jaw clenched, his posture growing tense. "You're overthinking," he said quickly, but the words sounded hollow. Amina let out a faint breath, almost amused. "No," she said softly. "I stopped thinking a long time ago." She turned and walked toward the cabinet near the wall, her silhouette and calm measured. Opening a drawer, she pulled out a small file, neatly arranged, carefully kept.
Prepared.
Zaid's eyes followed her movements now, unease creeping in. "What is that?" he asked. Amina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she returned to the table and placed the file beside the divorce papers. Then she opened it. Inside were printed messages, call records, dates, details.
Proof.
Not messy. Not emotional.
Precise.
Organized. Every page told a story he thought had been hidden. "I found out months ago," she said, her voice steady. "The day you forgot your phone at home." Zaid's face paled slightly. "And since then," she continued, gently turning another page, "I've been watching."
"Not you."
"Your patterns." The mistress stepped back unconsciously, her confidence now completely shaken. Amina closed the file slowly and looked at Zaid one last time. "You didn't break me," she said. "You gave me time. Time to understand. Time to prepare. Time to let go." The power in the room had shifted completely now. Zaid was no longer in control. Not of the moment. Not of her. And certainly not of what was about to come next. Because what he thought was the end of her story was actually the beginning of his consequences. And as Amina's calm gaze held his, it became clear. This wasn't just a woman who knew the truth. This was a woman who had been quietly building it into her strength. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was controlled, deliberate, and for the first time that night it belonged entirely to Amina. The file rested open on the table, its contents no longer just papers, but proof.
Truth. Power.
The soft yellow light from the ceiling lamp fell across the pages, highlighting every detail Zaid had tried so carefully to hide. Amina placed her hand gently over the file, as if grounding herself in the moment. "You wanted me to sign something," she said calmly, her voice steady. "So, let's talk about that." Zaid remained still, his earlier arrogance completely gone now. His eyes moved between the papers and Amina, trying to understand how the situation had slipped so far out of his control. "What is all this supposed to prove?" he asked, though his tone had lost its sharpness. Amina met his gaze, without hesitation. "That I was never as blind as you thought." She reached into the file again and pulled out another document, this one different. Official. Stamped. "I spoke to a lawyer weeks ago," she continued. "Not because I was afraid, but because I was preparing." The mistress shifted uneasily near the door, her presence now smaller, almost irrelevant in the weight of what was unfolding. Amina placed the document beside the divorce papers. "The house," she said softly, "is in my name." Zaid's head snapped up. "What?" "The accounts you barely paid attention to, the investments you thought didn't matter," she went on, her tone still calm, still controlled. "They were handled carefully, legally, quietly." Each word landed with precision. "You were busy building another life," she added, a faint edge of truth beneath her calm. "I was securing mine." The room seemed to shrink around them. Zaid took a step forward, disbelief written across his face. "You can't just—" "I already did," she interrupted gently. Not loudly, not harshly, but firmly enough to stop him. Amina picked up the divorce papers, holding them lightly between her fingers. "You wanted an ending," she said. "So here it is." There was no anger in her voice.
No bitterness.
Only clarity. Only strength. The mistress looked at Zaid now, her earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by uncertainty, perhaps even doubt, because the man who had seemed so powerful just moments ago now stood powerless. And Amina, the woman he thought he could break, had already won without raising her voice. She placed the papers back down on the table, perfectly aligned. "Sign them properly," she said softly, meeting his eyes one last time. This time with understanding. And in that moment, it became undeniable. Her power was never loud, never obvious, but it was real, unshakable, and it had been there all along, now fully revealed, leaving Zaid with nothing but the weight of what he had lost, and the beginning of a regret he could no longer escape. The room felt heavier than ever. The soft hum of the city outside, the honking cars, the distant laughter, the echo of life moving forward, seemed to mock him. Zaid stood near the doorway, staring at the table where Amina had arranged everything with quiet precision. The divorce papers rested there, untouched except for her calm, deliberate placement. Every line, every stamp, every signature space reminded him of what he had lost and what he could never regain. For a moment, he didn't move. His hands twitched slightly at his sides, as if he could physically grasp the power slipping from him, but it was gone. Not stolen, not hidden, gone because he had never noticed it, never respected it. He recalled the mornings when Amina had greeted him with a gentle smile, the afternoons when she had quietly managed the house and the accounts, the nights when her presence had filled the silence with comfort. He remembered thinking it was her place to be small, to follow, to wait for his approval. And now she had already walked past all of that, leaving him behind. His phone vibrated. A message. A simple notification, a small digital blip, but it felt like a hammer. It wasn't hers. He couldn't text her. He couldn't call her. She wasn't waiting. She wasn't even thinking about him anymore. "What have I done?" he whispered, almost to himself. His voice was low, unsteady, carrying the weight of disbelief. What did I lose?" He sank into the nearest chair, the polished wood cold beneath his hands. His mind replayed everything, the missed opportunities to show respect, the careless words, the nights spent chasing someone else's attention while the person who mattered most had been right there, silent, patient, building a life stronger than he could imagine. Outside, the city lights twinkled through the windows. Somewhere below, people laughed, argued, and moved forward. And yet here, in this quiet apartment, Zaid felt frozen, trapped in a reality he had created himself. He looked at the door where she had last stood. Amina's presence lingered like a shadow, a quiet, unstoppable force. It wasn't anger that haunted him now, it was recognition. Respect, loyalty, dignity. All the things he had taken for granted were gone. Not stolen. Gone because he had refused to honor them. He rested his head in his hands. The truth had arrived, unflinching, merciless. He could see it now, too late, too clear. And for the first time, he understood what power truly meant. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of regret had begun to grow. It would not fade easily. It would follow him, everywhere, until he learned what he had lost. The morning air was crisp, carrying a gentle breeze that danced through the open balcony doors. Sunlight spilled across the room, painting golden streaks on the polished floorboards. For the first time in weeks, Amina breathed deeply. Not out of stress, not out of hesitation, but out of pure, unshakable clarity. She stood by the window, looking out at the city awakening below. The streets were bustling as usual. Vendors calling, children laughing, rickshaws weaving between cars, but none of it touched the weight that had once pressed on her chest. Today, the world felt different. Lighter, open, full of possibilities she had almost forgotten existed. Her hand rested on the door handle. Behind her, the apartment was quiet. The echoes of arguments, the cold glances, the late-night betrayals. All of it remained, but it no longer had power over her. She didn't glance back. There was no longing.
No regret.
Only the soft, steady rhythm of her heartbeat, matching the calm certainty that she had regained. She picked up her small bag, the one she had packed quietly over the past few days, each item placed with intention, each choice a reminder of her independence. As she walked through the hall, the sunlight fell on her face, illuminating a strength that had been tempered by pain but forged into something unbreakable. Outside, the street was alive, full of the ordinary chaos of life moving forward. Amina stepped onto the pavement, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin, the rough texture of the concrete beneath her shoes. She inhaled deeply, savoring the freedom that had been denied to her for so long. No one called her back. No one stopped her. And yet, she felt completely at peace. A neighbor passing by offered a polite nod. She returned it with a serene smile. The simplicity of human connection, untainted by manipulation or expectation, felt refreshing. Every step she took carried purpose. Every breath reminded her of the dignity she had preserved. This is mine," she whispered softly, almost to herself. "The life I choose. The respect I demand. The freedom I earned." She didn't look back at the apartment, at Saeed, or at the empty rooms that had once confined her. The past had served its lesson. The present, and the future, belonged entirely to her. And as Amina walked down the street, the sun climbing higher in the sky, there was a quiet, radiant power in her stride.
Strong. Free.
Unbroken. The city moved around her, but she moved within it, entirely on her own terms. Today was not just a day, it was a beginning. And in that beginning, Amina found everything she had been searching for all along.